And thank you very much for joining us once again here on PM Express. My guest on the show today is a man who is a statesman. It's one of our biggest exports internationally. We almost have gifted the rest of the world him. And I was a child when I used to rattle his name as a minister. I remember when back in was it JSS or primary school, whatever it was, you're mentioning the ministers, and you have to know that name. And I'm privileged to be speaking to him. Having observed him from a child up until now that I'm a full-time professional doing this job. He needs no introduction, but I have to introduce him. He, until very recently, was the head of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, and he's been doing some great work in the sub-region. I am delighted to say that I've been joined by none other than Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas. Dr. Chambas, thank you very much.
Thank you
for joining us here on PM Express.
Thank you.
It's definitely a privilege. I'm rarely starstruck, but I am that I can have you on my show. Part of your work was helping sub-regional countries navigate difficult elections, monitoring it, giving them advice, etc. And your own, I wonder, sometimes when I watch you on the BBC and in another country, I wonder, how do you look back on your own country and how we are faring? And does that sort of give you a certain authority to say, well, where I'm coming from, maybe, it's giving me a certain base. I mean, Kofi Annan always was proud of where he was coming from because Ghana was this island of peace in the sub-region. Do you look back on your heritage at all when you do this great international work out there?
No, there's no question that being a Ghanaian and performing the kinds of functions, the role that I played, was always very helpful. And I mean, back to my days at ECOWAS, because that's really where this regional, sub-regional role started. And at that point, where Ghana had been one of the very few in the sub-region to have experienced a smooth transfer of power from one government to another, from a ruling party to an opposition party. I think it came with a lot of pride to be a Ghanaian and to play a good officer's role, to play a role of prevention of conflict and sometimes actual conflict mediation, be it in electoral processes or just in governance context, because there was a good example that one could point to. I mean, you yourself, you're coming from a country where, let's face it, we've had our challenges, but what it is that was important is that we were able to navigate through all of that and to agree a system of governance where there was broad elite consensus around these issues, and then actual example of having this kind of smooth transfer of power from a ruling party to an opposition party. That was an advantage to one as a Ghanaian playing that kind of leadership role.
You've been assessing in the program that Kodeyo has been organizing to review our elections. You've been assessing how we perform in the 2020 elections. What for you are your thoughts on how we've done? Again, I guess knowing all the other examples that you've been involved in the sub-region, how have we fared?
No, we did quite well within that regional context. This cycle of elections, about 6-7 countries that were holding elections, and if you compare the performance here in Ghana, I think there's no question that we did much better than several of the countries. I mean, without naming them, I mean, if you look at the level of tension, it's true that election seasons are periods of high political tension, high political competition. But if you judge by level of violence, if you judge by level of acceptance even of results, I think Ghana will still perform better than the rest of the countries which were also holding general elections. Of course, if we hold the standards to what is expected, this is where one thinks we could always do better. And that's why this session by Kodo is very useful. And again, I can assure you that what is taking place here at this retreat to review and look at the process preparatory to, during the elections, post-election, I'm very certain that perhaps in none of the other countries is this kind of exercise taking place. And just sitting through it and the depth of the analysis, the capacity of the different stakeholders, it makes one feel quite proud and assures me that whatever shortcomings that we have experienced, we do have the capacity to improve upon our performance and to ensure that the next cycle of elections will be smoother, should be smoother than has been the case, was the case in 2020.
You delivered the keynote address, and one of the things that you said that struck me was the deaths that were recorded in elections, and you emphasized the point that that has tainted an otherwise very good image on international scene. In what ways has it done that?
You asked me before, as a Ghanaian, you know, how I felt doing the work that I did in other countries. And one of the things that I always used to advertise was the fact that in Ghana, we've had violence-free elections. Certainly without election-related killings, which it will astonish you to know that in some of the countries, you can be looking at figures as high as 200 election violence-related deaths. Hundreds, you know. I mean, including in this last cycle of elections, in Guinea, you know, upwards of 80 people died. So also in Cote d'Ivoire. And in Ghana, that is just something that we have not known. Yes, there may be some deaths, but they're usually from accidents. Party activists or whatever coming from a rally, and then there's a motor accident, there's a vehicular. Those kinds of deaths, yes. But actual deaths from killings related have not happened. So, I mean, 5 is the number that we're, so one should not exaggerate. So it's not as if it was a scale that is out of proportion. But on the other hand, even one death from electoral process is probably one too many. And because we've been able to do it in the past, we should not have this as a trend. And I would hope that it has happened. You know, we put it behind us. I'm glad that there are prosecutions in some of those cases. Others are being investigated. So that is welcome. But I just wish that that box is not one that will be ticked when it comes to Ghana, so that we can continue to be the real example of electoral democracy, of peaceful electoral democracy that we are.
You look at the factors that may have led to this, and today we've, from the police, etc., we've led a bit of Dr. Kwesini giving fantastic analysis of some of the implications. Having done this since 1992, as you rightly said, you were not expecting this to happen. Sure. You think that maybe some fundamental issues are still simmering that we haven't possibly dealt with, i.e. vigilantism, which is a key thing that had come up. We've been talking about it. That we haven't sort of dealt with so categorically, that may be fueling this constant tension that we feel we almost seem to pull back from the brink. This is where we actually saw lives lost. And maybe we should be dealing with some of the fundamental issues to prevent a further escalation next 4 years.
Yes, you mentioned the word vigilantism, and that's new language in the electoral context in Ghana. And although we've had macho men and other enforcers of one category or the other, I think the notion of vigilantism brought this to a new level. And prior to the elections, we were all on notice. I mean, certainly at the United Nations where I used to work, at ECOWAS, this discussion was one that was rife and one where there was concern. And the question was, where is this coming from? Why is this even associated with Ghana? Because it's just something that there was a feeling that Ghana is capable of dealing with and dealing with it decisively. And we thought, in fact, that that was the case when there was an inquiry, a commission of inquiry, I mean, led by very respected and capable, eminent jurists, Justice Smart, Emil Smart, Emil Short, who is highly regarded, respected, and with some other very prominent Ghanaians. Then the role of the National Peace Council. So we thought this was well under control, but the specter of vigilantism rearing its head during the election was still there. And at the end of the day, when you get even as few deaths as happened, there's a temptation to say, well, didn't it actually manifest itself this way? And therefore, perhaps that issue has not been put to rest. So what else can be done? And I was encouraged, I have to tell you, at this retreat, to see that between the two major political parties, they're raising it, and they seem to be raising it in a constructive context and willing to engage in further discussions on how it can be handled. Incidentally, on many of the other issues relating to better management of the process, I think it was a very healthy display of respect among the NDC and the MPP that was displayed here, and I think it should permeate to other levels. And I think if that spirit that was demonstrated at this retreat, some kind of willingness to work together, to build better consensus, stronger consensus, is taken forward, then there's no reason why we can expect to see less of any violence in our elections going forward.
The minute we look at our politics and say Ghana is becoming too polarized politically, almost split down the middle and constantly being pulled apart. You agree with that view looking in from outside, and now that you're in? Is Ghana maybe more polarized now than it used to be?
It's probably the constitutional model that we have adopted, and it is one that is based on winner takes all. And my own experience talking to both sides, and I have a privileged relation to be able to, talk to both sides with confidence and in good faith, and to hear. There seems to be an admission that we need to do something about it, but how and the mechanics of doing something about it just seems to be what is lacking. And when each of the parties in opposition, they tend to advocate more for dealing with this winner take all, but then when they get into government, perhaps the appetite weakens a bit, or the urge to really bring about the necessary reforms that can deal with that wanes. But I think going forward, at some point, we really need, as a country, as a people, to step back. I think after 30 years of operating this constitutional model, to see where it is that there can be some adjustment, just to allow for more consensus building. multipartyism is a key feature of the dispensation, the democratic dispensation we have chosen. And it serves well because it allows for debate and contrasting and opposing views, out of which good ideas can come out of. At the same time, I think just looking globally, there are probably other systems of governance, democratic models based on multipartyism, but at the same time where perhaps a broader spectrum of views can be taken on board, and inclusiveness in governance can also be more effective and evident once elections are over and one needs to rally a broader spectrum of the population, of views, of interest to move a country forward. So that kind of reflection at some point will be welcome.
Do you see that, in line with that, do you see the current hung parliament as I guess, progress then? Because for the first time, we have a president, a vice, and then the third person in command is from the opposition parties, as in what the constitutional structure is.
Yes.
For the first time in the Ghanaian history, and I dare say on the continent, to have that sort of architecture where in parliament is split down the middle, but then the man at the helm is from the opposing side, is Ghana's democracy, and it's an irony, we've just been talking about the debts, but then the reflection of the outcome almost shows a certain maturity in the, I guess, voters' sophistication in the decisions you're making, but also sharing power somewhat through the mechanisms of parliament. What's your own assessment of the way the elections panned out eventually?
No, I've heard people articulate this view that perhaps that was a message from the populace, that they want to see more consensus governance than a polarized approach, and so even if it was not by design, what has emerged is a situation where the two parties are almost obliged to work together. And in that regard also, I think it was probably a message to our parliament that the critique or criticism of the parliament as a rubber stamp is probably now something that we should take more seriously, that in this new context, let there be more demonstration of parliament playing its oversight role, and just allow for a better scrutiny of policies, of government programs, etc., and allow for an approach where things will be examined on their merits, and there will be constructive debate, of course geared also at ensuring that government business is not politically tied down, and that the parliament will do its functions properly, the opposition will play its role as opposition, and at the same time that government will be allowed to govern, and that laws that need to be passed will not be held hostage simply by fact of some kind of gridlock in parliament, because that also cannot augur well for the good of the country. I mean, we don't want to see a gridlock in the parliament. We want to see healthier debate, more of scrutiny of policies, and more constructive criticism and constructive proposals, counter proposals to improve and ameliorate the legislative process. So it's a test for Ghana, because as you said, I mean, I don't know any other country on the continent where you have this close, almost an even split. A hung parliament, as you've called it. In other systems, if it was a parliamentary system, this would call for a grand coalition, without a doubt, because the other side would simply not have been able to govern. And again, that adds to that need to reflect on the executive nature of our governance, Should it be strictly winner takes all? At some point, do we need to reflect on that and show some kind of proportionality to deepen, just ability to create a national vision, national perspective, and to mobilize all towards certain national agendas? Because, given where we are still, 60 plus years after independence, sometimes there's this desire to see the country move. And it seems that oftentimes just when we seem to be about to take off, then we seem to slump again, and some challenges. And some people have argued, and perhaps not without reason, that if we were better at forging, defining, forging a national purpose, a national program that we mobilize everybody around, without compromising the multi-party nature of our democracy, that would also augur well for our country.
I want to take a quick break. I want to return. I'll get Dr. Ibn Chambas' thoughts on something he touched on in his address about the Mo Ibrahim measurement of Ghana and the areas that we would identify that we are falling short. And then I'll get his thoughts on his recommendations on how to make our democracy even stronger. He has some very strong recommendations on looking forward to 2024 that I will tap into. Stay with me. And you're still with me on PM Express. My guest is still Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas. He is the immediate past head of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel. He's a great son of the land, and I'm happy that he's joined us to share thoughts on everything Ghana and beyond. Doc, just before the break, we were talking about the elections that just gone by, but there was a pre-election phase which led to the build-up into the December 7th. One of the key things that happened started with the change at the Electoral Commission of the leadership. The new government appointed a new chairperson, and they went into the compilation of a new register, which is hotly contested. And so for many, almost as if we were building ourselves up to a crescendo of violence going into the elections, that period. What's your assessment of how that pre-election phase, again drawing from experience across the continent, always maybe influences how tense the election itself becomes, and in the Ghana case?
Well, yes, you've raised the issue of the appointment of the electoral commissioner and the acrimony around it. Of course, you have to roll back to the impeachment of the previous electoral commission, and personal as a Ghanaian, and as someone who knows both highly qualified Ghanaian females, and I'm emphasizing that because of the male-dominated nature of our society and even our politics. I feel that it's unfortunate that two highly qualified females have been caught in a situation where even their individual competence and other issues have come into play. In the retreat, some of the presenters have talked about the unprintable words that were used at both of them, which is totally unacceptable. So they were victims of a process of a polarization that we've talked about, a process of appointment of an important role such as electoral commissioner, who is like a referee and a match commissioner at the same time, in a game where there was very little consultation to produce someone who at least would enjoy the minimum confidence from the other that is expected. And this in spite of their personal capacities, their training, their experience, and their huge capacities. And that's what is regrettable. That we want females of that caliber to enjoy more respectability and to be role models in our society. So, I mean, I just feel that it's very unfortunate that these two ladies have been caught in this web of politicking, which then, of course, in the case of the current Electoral Commission, build up to the tensions around the December elections, and before that, issues around the voter register. You know, so it just seemed as though nothing, she could do nothing right. And there was this bitterness that developed between her and the major opposition party, which probably was avoidable if the process had been handled differently. But be that as it may, I think we need to move forward, and I think that there is an effort that has to be made here to create a better working relationship between the EC and all the political parties, especially the NDC in this case.
Do you agree with those who say the appointment process going forward should be, EU at least recommends that in this final monitoring report, should be more inclusive?
There's no question that given again the highly competitive nature of our politics, I mean, even in Ghanaians, we love our football, in the football context. If a referee is named for a match, Hearts versus Kotoko, Hearts versus Olympics, and one side, one team feels that we're not comfortable, there's a process to review that. So it just will be healthier if we have a process which is more inclusive, which is more consultative, so that at the end of the day, the person that is made may not enjoy total unanimity from all the parties, but at least in our context for now, the two major parties must have a certain minimum level of acceptance of the Electoral Commission. There's no question that that would be very helpful. So that's a recommendation that I think going forward needs to be looked at.
Yeah. And then we've just talked about Parliament and how the uniqueness of this architecture now, as the outcome of the elections, is a positive one. But the process leading to the, I guess, the final election of a speaker was very acrimonious. I don't know whether you even watched it. It was very historic, the voting process, but then some really unfortunate incidents of the military storming the floor of Parliament, chaos on the, and I know you have a lot of friends on both sides, and I don't know if you observed the whole process.
Actually, I didn't, because I came in that evening.
Okay.
After a long day in Dakar and a long flight. So I assumed things were going to be very normal, I must admit. So I went to bed rather early. And the next morning, when I woke up and found out that Parliament was still in session, I was a bit surprised, because this was around 7 o'clock in the morning. And I thought everything was, and then I realized that it was still in session, and I started getting worried, because I knew that the swearing in of the president had to be around 11 o'clock. So, but of course, I mean, everything had been replayed, and we've watched it on your TV and other channels. What happened there?
Did it shock you?
Not totally, because one is used to seeing this even in more mature democracies these days. The acrimony, I mean, and especially, let's face it, after what had gone on in the US Congress. I mean, I can't sit here and pretend that it was totally shocking if it happened on the Hill in Washington, D.C. At the same time, given where we like to hold ourselves as, you know, being the example that we are, I thought it was probably a bit too much to see this play. But again, by the time of the swearing in, we demonstrated a lot of maturity. The speaker had been chosen, and one, incidentally, who is one who knows Parliament in and out. So in that regard, you couldn't have been looking for a better person to put Parliament in his hands, you know, in Honorable Alvin Bagbin. And So even though it was unfortunate, I think in our usual Ghanaian way, we managed to put a good face to it. And now the task is for that parliament to prove that it can, in fact, deliver on the work of parliament, ensure that it doesn't create too much gridlock, because we have serious challenges that need to be addressed. Yeah. The government must be able to have its programs examined properly, parliament playing an effective oversight role, opposition, of course, being able to be constructive and effectively so, and for us to turn this into an advantage and demonstrate again that we have a capacity as Ghanaians in a hung parliament to allow our democracy to consolidate and to advance.
Talk about consolidation. Again, the outcome went to the Supreme Court.
Sure.
You touched on the Mo Ibrahim recent assessment of African countries. And in your address, you touched on an aspect of it that said something to the effect that rated our justice system lower than it used to be. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, you know, the Mo Ibrahim index has different categories. And two categories where, so one is electoral governance, which for Ghana still remains quite high, 80% and above. And then there is justice and rule of law. And then the other category is security and rule of law. In these two particular categories, we have declined. The first, the security and rule of law category, I think a lot of it had to do with the whole debate against vigilantism and it's just been flogged in the media. And I think when the experts themselves who do these evaluations came in, they probably were not satisfied with the manner in which we have handled it. So I think a lot of that will have to do with that and impunity and what is perceived to be the security being politicized, etc. So we need to look at that and see what we... On the judicial side, I think also maybe the whole debate that has been going about slow justice system and some high-profile deaths which have not really come out with any clear convictions. Of course, it takes both the prosecution side and the judicial side, but the fact is that some of the, at least in two of the high-profile political cases known in the country, it hasn't resulted in any convictions or acquittals, if they have to be so. So these are some of the things that could have dented that image. And then, of course, before that, you had the Anas Armeyao investigations, which threw spotlight on the Ghana judiciary and came up with fairly credible allegations of corruption. And I think that these are the factors at play. And so once we know what the issues are, I think the judiciary, it's incumbent on my Lord, the Chief Justice and the judiciary, Judicial Council, etc., to also look at these factors critically and see what can be done concretely to improve and to bring back the high regard that our judiciary has had in the past, and which at this point, of course, is scoring rather lower than had been the case in the past.
You touched on one of the reasons possibly could be the Ayawaso West Wagon by-election violence. I was invited as a witness before the commission together with Professor Kwesieni, and the view post the report, the white paper, is that government had not done enough to implement the recommendations so that we learn from the lessons but also prevent a recurrence. And I don't know what your view is on the post-commission sitting and how well we've done, one, learning from the lessons, and two, implementing these recommendations to avert future bloodshed in either elections or by-elections, so if so maybe going forward.
I have not focused on it as closely as you or Professor Eni may have, But once the commission report is there, white paper was issued, of course, going forward, we can always determine what aspects of it have been implemented, what remains outstanding. Governance issues are continuing issues, not a single event. So those aspects that need to be implemented should now be taken up and implemented going forward. And I was happy to get this sense from the discussion among the political parties at this retreat, where there was a consensus, particularly the two major political parties involved, the NPP and the NDC, that there's still some work to be done there, and that there is a willingness for them to collaborate to ensure that progress is made in fully implementing the recommendations of the report, and hence, of course, the white paper that is emanated from it.
We're approaching 2024. They're still very far away, but the whole essence of reviewing is so that we learn our lessons and improve going forward. What for you are some of the key areas we need to be focusing on to improve for 2024?
What has been helpful from the retreat here is that it is not so much focused on a blame game, name and shame. No. It's very prospective, and that's what I like about this CODEO all-stakeholder forum that we are at. And all the key stakeholders are here. And when I've listened to each one, they are themselves identifying what they need to do and improve upon. Starting maybe even with the media, where you yourself, you made an excellent presentation, your colleagues from the Media Commission, from the Foundation, West Africa Foundation, and all of that geared towards, we have time now, between now and 2014, and there are some aspects of our work that we will improve on. The National Peace Council, the same discourse that we're hearing from them. How to take their work beyond even the national level, to regional level, district levels, grassroots levels, the NCCE, of course the Electoral Commission, who were here with very technical presentations and with an openness of mind, which I found very useful. And you can see from some of the persons that are here that these are people who have handled elections over and over and over, and their technical competence is not in doubt. They know exactly what to do, if of course they have all the resources, and if they can be forward planning, as is being done now, taking into account recommendations of all the other observers. You've mentioned the EU observers, but there were ECOWAS observers, there were AU observers. So if we combine what the international observers saw and then what the domestic observers have also recommended. And let me say that for me going forward, we need to see how we deploy more and more domestic. It's part of our ownership of this process. And even before I left the UN, that was one of the things I was advocating with internationals, that we can get more value for money if we support. We can put, international observer, maybe just a ticket to come to Ghana. But, that could give you 20, 30, if not more, local observers who know the terrain, who can go to more remote areas, who can ensure that we have a broader spread of observers. So I think going forward, these are some of the things that we need to. The security sector, brilliant presentation from the police, who outlined their strategy leading up to the elections, and based on the shortcomings that have been experienced, I think they will improve. They should improve, so that next time around we will have a smoother process, so that not only the processes itself, the electoral process itself is better secured, but also the electorate can have a more ambient environment, more calmer environment in which they can come out to freely express their choice at elections, which should not be about, war and weapons. Election is a democratic expression of a free choice using the ballots, not bullets. And so this should be the approach going forward. So I think the different stakeholders have shown good appreciation of what the challenges were. The National Identification Authority made an excellent presentation. My good friend, Professor Tefua, to show how between now and 2024, they can position themselves to improve on the database for the Electoral Commission to draw a voters list. I mean, already they have registered 15 million Ghanaians. Incidentally, that's just about 50% of Ghanaians are like that. So, and it's a card that has, I mean, just sitting there and going through the features of this card is so impressive that if between now and then the rest of adult Ghanaians can all be captured and given their cards, it will hugely remove one of the contentious issues around the December 2020 elections, which was the voters register. I am glad that in the end it didn't become as contentious as it could have been, because in the end, despite the initial hesitancy, a register was produced in which all the major players felt, okay, this is a register we can work with. But going forward, I think that given the work that the NIA has to ensure that all adult Ghanaians, indeed all Ghanaians ultimately, have a national ID card, it will go a long way to remove that as one of the contentious issues. And that can also create the environment for peaceful elections.
I want to take my final break and then we'll wrap up. I'll wrap up with questions about Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas himself. I mean, you may not know, as I've been saying, immediate past. This is fairly recent. I wonder what he will say his key legacy is, and do we have him now here permanently in Ghana? Stay with me. And thank you very much for staying with us on PM Express. My guest is still Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas. Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas, you recently left your post at the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel. How has it been? How many years were you there?
Well, actually, let me go back to my entire role internationally. I left Ghana exactly 20 years ago.
Goodness me.
To go to the ECOWAS, where I served as the initially executive secretary of the ECOWAS and then the first president of the commission, having led the process of transforming ECOWAS from executive secretary to a commission. So those reforms were undertaken under my watch. And then when I left ECOWAS, I went to the ACP, the African, Caribbean and Pacific Group of States, where I did another 3 years there. And then I was 8 years with the UN in my last role with the UN, initially in Darfur, where I was a joint representative of the African Union and the UN. And then, of course, came to a wholly UN mission, which I led for 6.5 years.
So that's a long service to the international community. What would you say has been your fondest, I guess, memories of that time when you crisscrossing the world?
Well, to be frank with you, my period at ECOWAS were very eventful.
Okay.
This was the moment where we still had the civil wars raging in Liberia, Sierra Leone, later Cote d'Ivoire. And we also were witnessing the transition, really, from autocratic military governments to more democratic dispensations. And in that period, ECOWAS assumed a leadership role that up to today is still referred to as the golden age of ECOWAS, where we enunciated important principles, including the one on zero tolerance against unconstitutional change of government. So to have been in the center of all of this, with support from strong leaders in the region, I should say that. You had President Kufuor of Ghana, who was committed Democrat and determined that we needed to move away from a past of intermittent interruptions in democratic governance. You had President Obasanjo of Nigeria, Baba, as he's fondly called, was very activist and committed also to put the past of military government. He himself, incidentally, being a military, but just determined that that had to be a past for West Africa, that we would no longer be the region known for frequent military interventions in our governance. You know, you had President Wade in Senegal, just to mention some of these. And these were continental leaders and accepted as such, so that whatever principles they were enunciating here, they were taking them also to the continental level, the African Union, which also embraced this doctrine of zero tolerance. And in that regard, if I may just make a slight deviation, it's a bit regrettable that when we see the situation in Chad, that there seem to be a very easy acquiescence to, notwithstanding the challenges in the Sahel and the key role that Chad plays in ensuring peace and security in Lake Chad Basin, in the greater Sahel. But there's just a concern that if you don't have a stable governance at home based on rule of law and respect for human rights, then the sustainability of any governance will be in question, and that may ultimately undermine any external role that the country may have. But so it was a very exciting period, and this is where all the principles about even accompanying and supporting countries to ensure democratic elections, and because we adopted principles, protocols on governance, and democracy, for mechanisms for conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and all of this opened the door for an active role by the regional organization to support member states, so that sovereignty did not become an absolute shield, you see, and so there was a policy of non-indifference, so that what is happening in my neighbors' home, I cannot be totally indifferent, because when things get out of control and refugees are generated, they will flow into the neighborhood, or as the African proverb goes, if your neighbor's house is on fire and you sit unconcerned, maybe yours may just be getting ready to catch fire. So it was an exciting period.
What would you nail down as your biggest legacy?
Well, I mean, we convened the Accra Comprehensive Peace Agreement here in Ghana for bringing an end, a definitive end to the conflict in Liberia, for which, incidentally, when President Ellen Johnson came in her first celebration of independence, I had the honor of being invited to Liberia and to be recognized and to be honored by a national. And up to today, it's quite touching when I go, whether it's a private visit or official visit to Liberia. My many Liberian friends keep referring to the role, humble role that we played in their civil war and ensuring that peace returned. It's quite gratifying to know that one's role was not. And then more recently, I think in Burkina Faso during the transition, it was a very central role that one played there to ensure that after 27 years of President Compaoré, that the process there did not lead to chaos. And we were in fact able to have a very successful transition, civilian-led transition in Burkina Faso that led, of course, to peaceful elections, which has now seen, 5 years, and we've had second elections that were also very peaceful and credible. So there are a number of these issues that when one looks back upon, you feel that your humble contribution was not in vain. You're seeing good progress.
Are you home to stay?
Absolutely. I mean, you did age me in the 70s category. So I think at that age, as my friend Kwesi Joda, Sam Joda says, at 70 we need to relax, stay back, but occasionally also give our point of view and see how we can be helpful, useful to ensure that Ghana continues to shine. That's our only ambition at this point.
Are you going to be quietly, you know, enjoying the, I guess, the life of now staying home, or contributing some way, in some form, in an official capacity, or as a private citizen? What's the thinking there?
Well, I mean, destiny has this way of determining some of these things. But as you can see, Codeo have taken a step to implant me.
Disturbing your Ramadan.
But doing a good thing, you know. Ramadan is about peace in the world, so as long as Codeo is here to see how we can continue to enjoy a peaceful Ghana, I think they have firmly implanted me in civil society, and I'm looking forward to continue to work with such like-minded civil society groups, research groups, which are all committed to playing their own role for the consolidation of our democracy.
Okay, so fair to say we'll be seeing you in the civil society space a bit more.
No question about that.
Okay, and what if government wants to tap into your brain?
Well, I mean, I don't think we should get into hypothetical context like that. We are Ghanaians first and foremost, and whatever we can do to be supportive of our country, I think we're always willing to play our little, make our little contribution.
Yeah. Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas, thank you very much. If we were in a non-COVID environment, I would have given you a handshake.
It's understood.
But I couldn't. But I'm grateful that you joined us.
It's a pleasure.
And in the West, I would have taken an autograph on camera. But of course, I can't do it because, again, COVID doesn't allow it. But I'm grateful that you joined us.
It's a pleasure.
And grateful for your thoughts. And you've heard a lot, and there's a lot to chew on too as we prepare for another elections, 4 years away. But the preparations have already started. And as he said, I mean, he's here to stay, and civil society can tap in. We will be tapping him. We already started tapping in into his wealth of knowledge, gained both locally and internationally. And I'm pretty sure we'll be hearing a bit more from him in the coming days as we tap into the wealth that he's gained over the years in helping shape this great country of ours to the promised land, whatever that may be. Enjoy the rest of your evening.